is News Conference Extra with Conan Nolan.
Good morning and welcome to News Conference Extra, a special segment of Today in L.A. Weekend. In a moment, the Secretary of State Alex Padilla on the problems in voting throughout Los Angeles County on Tuesday. But first, Chuck Todd, host of Meet the Press, which airs every Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. So, Chuck, before we get into Super Tuesday, let's talk about this coming Tuesday, 6 primaries. A week ago, we were thinking that Bernie Sanders was going to have a delegate lead. Now he's trailing, and we get the impression that if the former vice president does extremely well in Michigan, he could pretty much lock the nomination up. Is that an accurate assessment?
Conan, I don't even think he has to do really well in Michigan. He can win it by a point, and he locks it up. He can win Washington State by a point, and it would lock it up. Remember, both of those states are states that Bernie Sanders won 4 years ago. So suddenly losing states that you won 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton, let alone trailing in the delegate count and things like that, I think they become symbolically important nails in sort of his pointing towards the end of his campaign. So yes, I think there is and by the way, and if somehow he ekes by in Michigan, and he could. I mean, I think his trade message can resonate there. And in Washington State, there's a pretty progressive electorate out there. But even if he narrowly survives, the following week of states of Florida, Ohio, Illinois, and Arizona, I think present a high hurdle for Sanders to show viability.
Right. Based on my own personal observations from 4 years ago, the campaign that Bernie Sanders launched then, similar to the one launched now, is something that is fundamental to who he is. It's his purpose for being. So I don't expect him to drop out of this race before the convention.
Look, I tend to agree with you on this, Conan. I will say, I'm going to put a little caveat in here, though. I do think Sanders personally gets along better with Biden than he ever did with Clinton. I think the party and Joe Biden treats Sanders with more respect this time around than they did 4 years ago. So I think that the opportunity here for Sanders to, while keeping his campaign going, creating a movement, do I think Sanders might pull his punches on Biden? I do. You know, if he thinks things are you know, if he loses, if things go as badly as they could over the next 2 or 3 weeks, but Sanders wants to keep the movement going, keep building the movement, I could see some sort of hybrid like that where he really pulls his punches on Biden going forward. He didn't do that as much on Hillary Clinton back 4 years ago, but again, I do think the personal relationship between Sanders and Biden might help mitigate some of the problems that Clinton experienced 4 years ago.
Yeah, but last week Bernie Sanders called Joe Biden a corporatist. I mean, I got the sense just the opposite.
He calls you and me corporatist too, probably, Conan. So pretty much anybody that isn't on part of his campaign is part of the corporate elite.
Does Elizabeth Warren endorse?
I think she hasn't yet, and I think that in itself is sending a message. I think the fact that she hasn't endorsed him shows you that while she may agree with more with him than with Biden, I do think there's some hard feelings. I do think she thinks, and she said this to Rachel Maddow, that she thinks that he doesn't do enough to deal with his own supporters, if you will. And I actually think she's genuinely torn. I mean, she told us why she didn't like either candidate in her own way. I think she thinks that Joe Biden capitulates too much, will cut a deal too quickly with the Mitch McConnells of the world, and I think she thinks Bernie's too stubborn to get anything done. And so I do think she's genuinely torn. I think the pragmatic side of her thinks that, well, maybe I can be with Biden and rein him in. If she thinks she can teach Sanders how to work with others, then I think she'd go there. So I think there's a genuineness there about why she hasn't done it yet.
And can we put something to rest here? Because the narrative that we hear routinely is that money buys elections. Governor Meg Whitman in California, Senator Michael Huffington in California proved to us that's not necessarily the case. We have not only
my boy Governor Al Checkbook.
Al right? Checkbook, exactly. So $500 million. He gets a couple of delegates, Michael Bloomberg out of American Samoa. Meanwhile, Joe Biden wins Massachusetts. He didn't spend a nickel in that state. He didn't even fly over it. And so the narrative is different. Can we say after we've seen what happened to Michael Bloomberg?
Can I just tell you, Conan, though, I've been a skeptic on money in presidential politics for a long time. I mean, it is not unusual now for the person who spends the most amount of money not to win in presidential politics. That's less so down the ballot. But our presidential campaigns are so nationalized, they're so covered in the free media, that if there is ever a place where money, look, money always matters. But where money is less important than it is down the ballot, it is a presidential race, particularly at certain points in time. Look, I'll just be honest as a citizen, the unintended consequence of Bloomberg succeeding, you know, had Bloomberg gotten that nomination and we basically had Bloomberg-Trump, you know this as well as I do, every rich guy in Silicon Valley and Palm Springs and you name it, and I think they all would think that they'd look in the mirror and think, hey, maybe I can buy a presidency too. I will say this: I think it's healthy that the democracy was able to prove that no matter how good of a billionaire you are, you can't buy it.
Who's on the program?
Dr. Anthony Fauci and Bernie Sanders.
Well, very good. Listen, Chuck Todd, if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. Again, nice work on Super Tuesday. We look forward to what happens in November. Good luck.
Yeah, let me know if the lines are done yet in L.A. County. We hope to get on
right.
both.
Okay.
Yeah, all right, brother.
Speaking of which, we're going to be taking a look into the lines at the L.A. County voting centers this past Tuesday. We talked with the Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, next.